next year. So I'm going to start where I did last week and talk about how Jesus loved a good story, and not just for their entertainment value. He enjoyed stories for their teaching value. And Eugene Peterson years ago said when Jesus told stories, they were, and get this phrase, they were narrative time bombs. Okay, now you probably know what a time bomb is. You might carry it around unsuspecting, not knowing you're carrying a time bomb, and then at an unannounced moment it goes off, right? Well, Jesus told stories as narrative time bombs, that they get inside your head, they get inside your heart, and when you least expect it, they detonate. But the stories that Jesus told, when they detonate, they don't cause destruction, they bring about transformation. They help you see the world in a new and different way. And so I'm going to try to illustrate this here for just a moment. If you were alive at the time, you remember September 11th, 2001. You remember the day when the planes hit the World Trade Center, a plane fell out of the sky in a Pennsylvania field, a plane crashed in the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. What you probably don't know is that at Ground Zero in New York, when the towers fell, as they began to excavate around the World Trade Center, what they discovered was a colonial-era ship buried at the base of the World Trade Center site. It's a Hudson River sloop, and as they began to kind of look at the wood that built the ship, they discovered the wood for that ship came from the same forest that wood was used to build Independence Hall in Philadelphia. It's absolutely amazing, and it was an interesting study in how ships were constructed back in the day. Now, how did a ship from the colonial era get at Ground Zero of the World Trade Center? Well, when the ship was retired in the 1790s, they were beginning to build out the Manhattan shoreline, and they were using fill, and they were using dirt and mud to kind of extend this shoreline. And they had this old retired ship, so they just used it as fill. And then when the World Trade Towers fell, it was discovered for the first time in over 200 years, 300 years. I'm terrible at doing math in the moment. It was a long time buried there, right? So now what's the point of that story other than being just a bit of trivia? Well, I think it's this. Sometimes life's tragedies reveal life's deepest treasures. Sometimes it's life's greatest tragedies that reveal life's deepest treasures. I hope that narrative time bomb just detonated, because we all know this to be true, that when we lose somebody that we love, that's close to us, a friend or a family member, it's in that tragedy that we discover the power of friendships and relationships and the importance of life and death. It's at moments that the world gets really cold and we have the warmth of family. It's in that tragedy that we discover that treasure. This is true of the Christian story as well. It's only through the crucifixion that we understand the resurrection. It's in life's greatest tragedies that we uncover life's deepest treasures. So Jesus told story after story of narrative time bombs, letting truth get on the inside of us and explode and reveal a new way of looking at life to us. And what we're doing now, last week and today and next week, are looking at probably Jesus' three best-known stories. So where I'm going to be today is in Luke chapter 10. And I would say of Jesus' top three, this is probably number 2, and we'll look at number 1 next week. So this is Luke chapter 10. Jesus is approached by an expert at the law, and he says this in Luke 10:25. On one occasion, an expert of the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Verse 26, Jesus says, what is written in the law? He replied, how do you read it? And listen to this man's answer. He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. So this is exactly what Jesus would teach as the greatest command. And either he had heard Jesus say this before and had adopted this reality, or maybe he had arrived at this conclusion on his own at the same time, right? But what we have here in this great command that Jesus also taught is actually 3 commands. And I wonder which one proves to be most difficult for you, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Let's just admit it. Sometimes it's hard to love God because he's invisible. We can talk to him, but we don't always feel like we're getting a reply. It's tough to love God because he seems, from our own experience, to be distant at times. One of the other commands embedded here is to love God, but also to love yourself. Notice that at the very tail end. I wonder if that's a challenge for you. And I think for most of us it is, because we kind of go to two extremes when it comes to ourselves. Either we hate ourselves, and I hope you don't feel that way, or we tend to be not loving ourselves, we tend to be in love with ourselves. I wish I could have learned this a long time ago. Unfortunately, it's taken me to almost 50 to get this, that I am not God's greatest gift to the world. You want to say amen right now, don't you? I wish I could have come to that conclusion a lot sooner than what I did. I think as soon as we come to the conclusion that I'm not God's greatest gift to the world, whoever you are, Jesus is, the more we begin to love ourselves. So here's a quick little vignette. George Garrett, 19-year-old British young man, he changed his name to Captain Fantastic, faster than Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, Wolverine, Hulk, and the Flash combined. That's what he changed his name to. I don't want to monogram his initials. That's weird. I thought you would laugh at that a little bit more. I'm going to put a question mark by that story. I may drop it before the second service. Yeah. So here's somebody who radically overestimates their own importance to the world. We're not called to be in love with ourselves. We're called to love ourselves. Or it could be your greatest challenge is not loving God. It's not loving yourself. It's loving your neighbor, loving other people. And this is a great challenge because other people, they're not exactly like us, are they? They're different. Sometimes in ways that's hard for us to bridge. And they're not like God, that instead of being invisible, they are visible, which means sometimes people are irritating. They're right in front of us, and sometimes it's difficult for us to love other people. So with this expert in the law, I think that's the one that caught him. He sums all this up. We're to love God and love neighbor and love people, and he tries to justify himself. Jesus says, do this and you will live. Verse 29, but he wanted to justify himself and asked Jesus, who exactly is my neighbor? So I want to take it from this man's point of view for just a moment, because he was an Orthodox Jew, highly educated, likely a Pharisee, and a teacher of the law at his level would define neighbor very narrowly, okay? First of all, as an Orthodox Jew, you'd look at everyone who's a non-Jew, at all the Gentiles out there, and say, well, they're just trash, right? They're not good like we are. They're pagans. Then a little closer to home, a person like this would look at the occupying Romans. The Israelite nation at this time was occupied by Roman army, and so the Romans, a little closer to home, I don't have to love them either, because I might consider them to be my enemy. And then even because he's a teacher in the law and he belongs to his little sect of religion, he would say, everyone who doesn't believe exactly like me, those Sadducees over there, or the Essenes over there, or the Zealots over there, they're on the outside too. He's defined neighbor very narrowly, and he's excluded people by their race or their politics or their religion. Those are still the great three divides we face today, isn't it? Just think about it. We tend to define neighbor by those who look like me, those who think like me, and those who believe like me. And Jesus is about to plant a narrative time bomb to explode that view and to help us to see people and the world in a little bit different way. So let's walk through this together, okay? Jesus replied, and it's okay, I'm just going to read this story and stop and make some commentary as we go. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. So Jerusalem to Jericho, it's a 12-mile road, 12-mile long road. It drops 3,500 feet. You're dropping that quickly. There's a lot of caves and crags and blind corners. It was a dangerous road to walk. Everyone knew that there were a lot of robberies, a lot of highwaymen on that road. I thought about doing this, that I could name about 3 places in town that we just instinctively know. You have to be careful when you go to those places. I don't want to offend anybody, but we know, we instinctively know that there are certain areas that are more dangerous than others. Well, this was one of those places. So a man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. That happens. They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him, and they went away, leaving him half dead. Verse 30 is a great description of how the world treats us, isn't it? It strips us. It beats us down. And we're not alive at the end of it. In fact, we're just barely existing. So a priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed on the other side. So this man, the one who was robbed, the victim, is going from Jerusalem to Jericho. I imagine this priest going the other way. He's going from Jericho to Jerusalem, which means he's going uphill. And if he's a priest, he's going to the temple to offer sacrifices to God. That was his job. And in order to do that, he had to be ritually clean, which means if he came into contact with a dead body, he was ritually unclean and would not be able to perform the duties to which would be assigned him, right? So now, he doesn't know whether the guy on the side of the road is dead or not. Certainly looks dead. He's half dead. And if he starts to take care of him and the man dies, he can't go to Jerusalem and do his duty to God. So here this man has a conflict with deploying his obligation to God or taking an opportunity to help somebody else. That's a tough one. But he decides to cross over on the other side and go on his way. Verse 32, so to a Levite, when he came to that place, saw him and passed on the other side. So here's a Levite. He's not a priest. He doesn't offer sacrifices. But, and I don't know what's going on in the Levite's mind, but it's happened before on this road that somebody would pretend to be injured, and when somebody stopped to help, other people hiding in the bushes would jump out and ambush him, right? So this could be a trap. And this Levite has something to say to our safety-obsessed culture, to our risk-averse culture. Listen, if you help other people, there will be a risk involved, and you will be taken advantage of, I can guarantee you. But he chooses not to go down that road, and he crosses the other side. Now, here's where I want to give a little interesting technical note on the text. Recently, and this hasn't even made it into the larger media yet, there was a scroll unearthed in Egypt. I mean, this is just a matter of months. That's an early copy of the book of Luke. And it's been found to deviate just a little bit from this text. And there's actually a verse added right here, okay? I'm just telling you what I know, all right? So there's a verse added right here in this ancient text that was found. A Christian comes upon the severely injured man on the side of the road. Shocked at the man's condition, he knows he needs to do something to help, so he reaches for his phone. Isn't this amazing? This is an ancient document that's been unearthed, and so he reaches for his phone, and he snaps a selfie of himself with a very serious expression as the other man lies helpless in the background. Posting the photo on Facebook and Instagram, he comments, "I can't believe people do this, thoughts and prayers." He clicks sends and walks away, leaving the man on the side of the road. This is absolutely amazing. This is a miracle, right? For those of you who are irony impaired, there is no text in Egypt. I'm going to get an email from somebody this week saying, "Where do I find this? This sounds good." Or it sounds like it's the devil, you know. There's no text. I'm joking. All right, just want to clear that up. It'll save you and me a whole lot of embarrassment this week. But that's kind of what we do sometimes, isn't it? You know what? Here's a little secret. Can I tell you a secret? If you see wrong done in the world and you post about it, you have done absolutely nothing. It's called slacktivism. You think you've done something, but the guys on the side of the road still, here's my encouragement, put away your phone and do something, okay? So, now there's a Samaritan. Now here is where the narrative time bomb starts ticking, and it starts ticking down. There's a Samaritan. I think when Jesus used that word, there was kind of a gasp. And as he traveled, he came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wound, and we're going to come back to these statements here in just a minute, pouring on oil and wine. He put the man on his own donkey and brought him to an inn. He took out 2 denarii. He gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Look after him, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any expense you may have." So let's talk about Samaritans here for just a moment, because at a critical moment in ministry, when people were really down on Jesus, here's what the Pharisees said. They said, Jesus must either be a Samaritan or demon-possessed. And it was a coin toss in most Jewish minds as to which one would be worse. That's what people thought of Samaritans in the Jewish culture. You might not know a name. There's a translation of it's a paraphrase of the scripture by Clarence Jordan known as the Cotton Patch Gospel. And he wrote this paraphrase in the 1960s, and he takes Jesus' story and kind of gives them a southern vernacular to them. Clarence Jordan wrote the Cotton Patch Gospels to confront white culture with its racism. When he gets to this point, he puts the N word in here. For Samaritan, he puts a black man helping a white man. After September 11th, when I taught this, and this was probably just a few months after September 11th, instead of Samaritan, I put a Muslim in here. And I got that week one of the most hateful, ugly, racist emails saying, "How dare you defile the Lord's teaching by putting a Muslim in there?" And let me say, my only response to that person was, "You have never really understood this parable, have you?" That's what it's about. It's the least likely individual to help. So the Samaritan, look what he does. He pours oil and wine and gives money and takes him to the inn. He does 4 things to help this person. By pouring wine on the wounds, that's a disinfectant, right? We still use alcohol to disinfect today. Oil is a symbol of healing, of recovery. He took his own money, he took his own resource, 2 denarii, which would be 2 days' wage, and I don't know what your pay scale is, but imagine you giving 2 days' salary to help somebody else out. But most importantly for me, he took his time. He used that resource of time and took the man to get the help, and whatever else he had on his calendar, it was set aside. Now what follows this story, again, the narrative time bomb is ticking down. Hasn't quite exploded yet, but there's 3 parts to the conversation that follows. Jesus asks a question, the man says something, and then Jesus, it's when the detonation happens, this last note, okay? So let's look at each part of the conversation quickly. Which one of these, Jesus said, do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Now I want you to get this, don't miss this part. Jesus is defining neighbor from the standpoint of the victim. He's not talking about the people traveling the road who are perfectly healthy, the priest and the Levite and the Samaritan. He defines neighbor from the standpoint of the victim. Which one was a neighbor to the person that was hurt? Listen, it's when you are helpless, when you are hurt, when you are down, that is when you discover the power of neighboring. Remember what I said at the beginning? Great tragedies often unearth great treasures. It's when you really need somebody that you discover the power of being a neighbor, so that when you're on the other side of it and you're not in need and you see other people in need, you know the power of what you are called to do at that moment. I think oftentimes the people who have been hurt the worst in life can be the best neighbors because they know what it is to be down and to need somebody to serve them. So then the man replies. The expert in the law replied, get this, the one who had mercy on him. This man can't even bring himself to say the S word. He can't even pull it, like the word Samaritan just catches in his throat and he can't say it. But he does a good job in here in defining what a neighbor does. Mercy. So I read this little quote a couple of weeks ago, and it took me a while to process this because I didn't know if I agreed with it at first. The author said, God will change your heart God can change your heart, but God won't change your habits. Sat with that for a while, and I think that's right. We often ask God to change our heart, and I'm going to use a silly example here. Say, God, I want to lose 10 pounds, Change my heart. Maybe you want to lose 10 pounds. God can change your heart to make you want that, but he's not going to change your habits. You've got to choose whether you're going to eat the potato chips or not, right? You have to choose your own habits. That's our part. I think God can change our hearts toward anybody. But what we're responsible to do is changing our habits toward those people. Whoever you define as those people, that's who we need to change our habits towards. So let me give you 4 habits here, and it goes back to the oil and the wine and the money and the time. When you see people in need, our first habit should be to help disinfect the situation. And I might sound a little mystical here and a little spiritual here, but I think this holds. Do you think that God might put you into a situation because you might be the only one to pray in a situation like that? If you're in a situation, especially around toxic people or hurting people, the first thing you can do, you can kind of disinfect the place a little bit by just praying. It's practicing the presence of God wherever you are. Whatever situation you're in, it could be that God, you might be the only Christian God has put into that situation. So when people are hurting, when people are in need, we practice prayer. When people are hurting and in need, we also offer oil of healing. One of the best things to do to help someone heal is not talk, but to listen. It is amazing what you will learn, and it's amazing what you will do to serve somebody if you just listen to them deeply. It's like the oil of healing. You don't have to offer advice. Maybe some of the people who complain the most are those who have no one to listen to them. Also, you'll be amazed at what kind of compassion you can have for somebody else when you just actually listen to their story. And then of all those resources, there's prayer and there's listening. The money and the time kind of come last. I think many times that we see a need, we just throw some money at it because it's easy, it's convenient, we've got it, and we can move on. But that actually may be something that comes later. Okay, that's not the first response. But for me, the one that sticks out the most is the time. Leaving enough margin in my life to say, God, wherever there's a need, I want to be able to set my schedule aside and just do that, whatever that is. Don't we see this in Jesus, that his ministry most of the time was interruptions, right? It wasn't what he had on the docket that day. It was what kind of flew out of nowhere. So we change our habits. And then Jesus said this, and here is where the time bomb detonates. Go and do likewise. Here's the one point I want to make today. If you don't hear anything else, please hear this. What did the Samaritan do? He didn't get up that morning and say, I got to change the world. I got to find somebody to serve. He was just on his way from Jericho to Jerusalem. But here's what he did. He served the one in his path. This is what we do. I'm bad at guessing numbers. I'm going to guess there's maybe 3,000-4,000 people here in this room right now. Okay. It's probably 350 or so. Imagine what would happen this week collectively if we went out of this place to not only practice the presence of God, but to practice the presence of people and to say, I'm just going to serve the one in my path. Here's how I'm going to pray this week. I'm going to pray when that moment comes, you'll know it, and you'll know that you know it. You'll flash back to this moment, and you'll go, dang it. It's exactly what Deron talked about, but I've got to be somewhere. It's a moment of decision to practice the presence of God, to practice the presence of people. So it's Salvador Dali, the famous artist. Whenever he'd go out to a really expensive restaurant, you know what he'd do? He would take out a check, and he'd write the check for the amount of the meal. Then he'd flip the check over, and he would draw a picture on the back. And he would leave it there on the table, knowing that the owner, if he knew who Salvador Dali was, knowing that the owner would never cash the check because the picture is worth more than the cost of the meal. You know what that story tells me? It tells me Salvador Dali was a cheapskate, is what it tells me. Yeah. Actually, what it tells me is that people recognize value. And there are some things that are more valuable than others, and some things that are more valuable than money. You know what our world values right now? We live in an unprecedented time of anxiety, unprecedented time of anger, and being ill at ease, and being frustrated. I think the world would just value somebody who practices the presence of God and practices the presence of people. And instead of living for ourselves, we live for someone beyond ourselves. Does that sound familiar? We live for somebody beyond ourselves, and we serve the people that God has put in our path. Now go and do likewise. Let's stand together.